Hey folks, David Glenn here from the North Carolina Sports Network. Join us at the first ever North Carolina Sports Network Bacon and Baseball event presented by the North Carolina Pork Council. The event is set for Friday night, May 3rd at UNCW's Brooks Field as the Seahawks open a huge Coastal Athletic Association series against in-state rival and fellow CAA contender Campbell. Get your tickets now for this huge three-game Friday, Saturday, Sunday CAA baseball series between UNCW Seahawks and the Campbell Fightin' Camels. We get it started on Friday night, so come out and meet me, David Glenn, and the rest of our North Carolina Sports Network crew, where we will be talking baseball and taping content with fans before and during the Camels Seahawks game. We will have lots of giveaways for fans, including bacon and baseball t-shirts and stickers while they last. We'll also be providing some great North Carolina pork sandwiches, courtesy of the North Carolina Pork Council and our friends at Jimmy's Wrightsville Beach in conjunction with UNCW Athletics. It's the first ever North Carolina Sports Network Bacon and Baseball event presented by the North Carolina Pork Council and the three-game CAA baseball series between the UNCW Seahawks and the Campbell Fightin' Camels. For ticket information, go to uncwsports.com/buy tickets. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the David Glenn Show, now seen and heard exclusively here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Please find more of our audio, video, and articles at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. On today's edition of the program, we will discuss our state's current place, a prominent one, in the baseball universe. That includes where we stand right now in the Major League Baseball expansion discussion. Did you know that North Carolina is the most populous state in the USA that doesn't already have an MLB franchise? Including the news we broke at ncsportsnetwork.com last fall that Carolina Hurricanes owner Tom Dundon, the hockey guy, is part of the movement to bring an MLB baseball franchise to Raleigh, North Carolina. Also, here's another did you know? Since today's featured guest is the most knowledgeable person I know on college baseball and Team USA baseball, whose national training complex, by the way, happens to be here in Cary, North Carolina. Did you know that the state with the most bids to last year's NCAA baseball championship was, you guessed it, North Carolina with 8. Wake Forest ended up making the College World Series. Duke also made it to the Super Regionals, or baseball's version of the Sweet 16. UNC, which has 11 all-time trips to the College World Series. NC State, which has 3, including 2 just under the Pac's current coach, Elliott Avent. East Carolina, UNC Wilmington, where we have an event coming up here at the North Carolina Sports Network. Campbell, the Charlotte 49ers. They also were all among the 64 teams in last year's big baseball bracket. Again, that gave us, our state, more participating teams than California, Florida, Texas, or any of the other states often mentioned as baseball hotbeds. Spoiler alert, almost all the teams I just mentioned are really good again this season. And I say that as we're just a month and a half away from this year's NCAA regionals, which will begin at the end of May. And we're just 2 weeks away from our big bacon and baseball event at UNC Wilmington on May 3rd. We are hosting a North Carolina Pork Council pig pickin' at UNCW's Brooks Field before the Seahawks game against longtime rival Campbell, which is now a fellow member of the Coastal Athletic Association. As we speak, the Seahawks are once again in first place in the CAA standings. Meanwhile, one of the most frequent questions I've received as we bring in our guests shortly over these last few years since we pulled the plug on that AM/FM radio version of our statewide show, which has been around in various forms for more than 25 years now. That question is, what do you miss most about doing that version of your show? Which, remember, at one point was heard in more than 300 North Carolina cities and towns, and that was for more than a decade. People often will volunteer to me what they miss most maybe as a caller, maybe as a regular listener, maybe as someone who met us in person at some point on our various travels and events across North Carolina. And then they'll often ask me what I miss most about that Monday through Friday, 15 hours of radio per week format that we had for about 2 decades. I do have a long answer to that question, but today, as we welcome our very special guest of the day, I will stick to the short answer, I promise. It is the people. There are regular callers that I miss. There are loyal listeners that I miss. There are lots of interns that I miss. There are some network affiliate directors that I miss. There are some salespeople that I miss. And on very rare occasions, and only rarely, there are even some executives that I miss. But the very long list of people I miss starts with 3 guys: Jared Brooks, Hayes Permar, and Daron Vaught, who were my hard-working producers, my work wives, if you will, for about 5 years each, or a combined total of 15 years, a decade and a half, as we transitioned from long ago being a popular triangle-based show for a long period to that truly unprecedented statewide platform that we built, which we now have once again here in a different way at the North Carolina Sports Network. With all of this in mind, we welcome as today's special guest on all things baseball, one of the great play-by-play voices of many sports across North Carolina. He's also the voice of USA Baseball, the co-host of the ACC Baseball, Etc. podcast. He's a lifelong baseball guy. He's the longtime producer of The David Glenn Show. I just mentioned his name a moment ago. He's also someone who, at this point, has become a beloved member of the extended Glenn family, and I mean that. Daron Vaught, I don't get to introduce everybody this way. Welcome back to the David Glenn Show, my friend. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Happy to be part of at least one episode of this newer venture of yours. Man, it's cool to hear you talk about getting asked about our former time together. Nearly 5 years. It was you and I, and you many years doing it before that. Can I say what I miss most?
Please do, because that was my next question. You've known me so well for so long, you anticipated. Go ahead.
I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day that live radio in a daily format, it sort of harbors this community in a way that other media does not quite. And it's the same but different, right? Like you doing this show as opposed to being in a studio where I can answer the phone and put you directly on with someone in fluid nature who has a question for you. It's a little bit different. For D1 baseball and ACC baseball, etc., former big leaguer Danny Graves and I can go live on their YouTube page, and we can see comments on YouTube. So there's a little bit of that to it. But we had, when we were doing the show, it was the mixture of everything. It was live 15 hours a week. You get to build some intimacy with an audience in that way. You can talk to them live as phone callers. You do marketing events that allow you to meet a lot of those same people and get to know a lot of those same people in certain ways. And then there's the community aspect of within our walls, right? It's me and you. It's the interns. It's the entire crew that's going to go out for one of our marketing events at one of the big college football games in the area. I think the community, and I mean that both specifically and broadly, it would be what I miss the most.
Well, I know one thing we agree on as I ask you to dive into your expansive baseball expertise. Our time together now has almost zero stress and always maximum fun.
Yeah.
As much as I enjoyed our 5 years together, like, there's a hard part. We'll never complain about writing and talking about sports for a living. I mean, we get it. But there's a harder part to that. And now, like, I'm taking you to play golf at some point soon. We will not have a worry in the world during, as we shoot, of course, 68 and 72 respectively on a local golf course here in the Triangle area. No, that's a lie. But the honest part is it's maximum quality time without the weight of what anybody would recognize as the harder part of going to work, whatever your job description might be.
Yeah, it is. It is a little less frequent, the quality time, right? Because again,
this is true.
Before it was on live radio. It was 15 hours a week, hours in the day in prep before that. So it was significantly more time, but it is still a job. And now there's none of that. So it's nice.
Well, to baseball, let's start with the biggest big picture question. You know how I like to do that as an interviewer. You get to be the interviewee today. We've been on opposite ends of that face-to-face with each other various times over the years. Where does the state of North Carolina stand right now in your eyes when it comes to the possibility of getting its own Major League Baseball franchise in the next round of MLB expansion, which the commissioner, Rob Manfred, has said is getting closer and closer to becoming a front burner issue in a league that, while many other leagues have expanded, MLB hasn't expanded for more than 25 years. Back in 1998 was the most recent time.
Yeah, I think it's still not quite imminent in the near future, expansion, that is, in Major League Baseball, but it is getting closer to time for that because the league has gotten through some more pressing issues like pace of play, which they enhanced with the action clock more recently, and some things like that. So they're working their way down the docket to eventually get to expansion, which it's not going to be in the next couple of years, but maybe in the next 10 years, this is the thing that sort of happens. Your listeners, viewers, I'm sure, have seen both Charlotte and Raleigh mentioned in a lot of those conversations in terms of the 6 to 8 markets that could potentially get an expansion MLB team. I think it helps North Carolina that there are 2 teams in that. And it speaks to the viability of this area and of those 2 markets. It fits a need geographically. There's not a Major League Baseball team in the Southeast between Washington, D.C. and Atlanta. Now, Nashville is in the hunt as well, and I guess they sort of technically would meet that requirement also. So I in the mix would be the appropriate way to say it, and it's in a fair way because none of the teams, whether we're talking about Portland out west, whether you're talking about Las Vegas, even, who sort of has the workings of a deal to acquire the Oakland Athletics, there are not firm plans for stadiums in any of these places yet. And until that happens, it's really, really difficult for the league to go all in on a team. So you might see some stuff about, there's this big groundswell for support in Nashville, and they've got an ownership group who's trying to get Major League Baseball to Nashville, just as we've got one in Raleigh who's going to try to get it here instead. I think in a single round of expansion, it would be difficult to give both markets a team. But we've seen how this works. I mean, when in our time together doing the show in its former version, we had Major League Soccer that wanted to come to North Carolina. We thought it was going to be Raleigh for a long time. And then in comes David Tepper, and the money matters at that point. So that's another thing that can just sort of turn this situation on its head, just like that, is if you get someone who comes in who's got significant financial backing to do it, that matters. Leagues pay attention to that. They pay attention to money more than anything, probably, I assume, in every case. So like in the mix is a fair way to describe it. I think there's a lot of support. I think we can all agree it would do well either in Raleigh or in Charlotte to have a Major League Baseball team, but there's a long way to go. So there's no reason to get overly encouraged or discouraged at the possibilities.
The original Saltworks has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets, or special recipe grits for breakfast, or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington. Daron Vaught is joining us on the David Glenn Show here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Moving to college baseball, I mentioned that our state's 8 postseason participants last year was the most for any state in the entire country, and it was also, by the way, the most in any single season in the history of our state. Now, I know we have at least 5 in-state teams that are in the current national top 25, maybe of your favorite poll or one of them, plus some others, including UNC Wilmington of the Coastal Athletic Association, that are in first place in their respective conference standings right now, meaning they're a great candidate to make the big baseball dance, if you will, as well. We'll get into the individual teams in more detail a little bit later, but for now, who are those most prominent in-state teams in college baseball, and what does that pecking order look like in the national rankings or otherwise?
It's a big clutter of teams, to be honest with you. Outside, the top 5 or so in most national rankings, fighting for one of those top 8 seeds, which in the NCAA baseball tournament would mean you have home field advantage both in a regional and in a super regional if you were to win the regional. It begins with, I'm looking at the D1 baseball rankings currently. Duke is number 7. East Carolina is number 9, North Carolina 11, Wake Forest 12. And, you get down into near 20 and you get some more Carolinas teams in there. Coastal Carolina, South Carolina is back in the mix. It could go a number of ways. I think Duke has been impressive all year long. I said at the beginning of the season when they toppled Wake Forest, who was the preseason number 1 by every measure, in the opening ACC series that they had, I said, I think Duke is an Omaha potential team. It's a team that could easily make the College World Series. And North Carolina, though there are skeptics because of their performance on the road, their youth in certain key areas, that's a team that is playing the part. They've played really well, and there's no reason they couldn't be one of the 8 teams left in Omaha at the end of this thing. And then Wake Forest, they were banged up. Some key parts were hurt toward the beginning of the year, and they are sort of rounding into their form that makes it very believable that they were the number 1 ranked team in the preseason. They're on fire and are surging toward maybe getting back into the mix for one of those top 8 seeds. I think it starts with those 3 in the ACC. East Carolina is atop the American Athletic Conference, as they typically are. Now it's a new look American Athletic Conference, and I believe it to be a much more competitive American Athletic Conference. It'll be not quite as much of a runaway for the Pirates, but it's a very good pitching team. The Pirates have 2 starting pitchers on the Golden Spikes Awards midseason watch list, and the Golden Spikes Award, for those unaware, is essentially the Heisman Trophy of college baseball. Their Friday starter, their Saturday starter, both on that list. It's a team that has had combined no-hitters twice in the past week or so. And I was in Greenville 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago, when they came a strike away from what would have been their first combined no-hitter of the season against UAB. So they're a pitch away from us sitting here and saying in the past 2 weeks they've thrown 3 combined no-hitters. They can pitch really, really well. That travels, that plays well deep into seasons. So you cannot forget about the Pirates.
Remember, you can find Daron Vaught's podcast with Danny Graves, he mentioned, through the folks at D1 Baseball. It's ACC Baseball, etc., available everywhere you can find podcasts. I saw in another poll, the Wolfpack joins the Devils, the Pirates, the Tar Heels, and the Demon Deacons in the current national top 25. The Pack is coming off taking 2 out of 3 from the Clemson Tigers at Clemson. And that leads me to my next question. If we have 5-ish top 25 teams in our state, plus UNC Wilmington and others that are kind of powerful mid-majors, if you want to use that term, how does that same ACC picture look? Because I know it's not only Duke, Carolina, State, and Wake. We're 4 for 4 here in North Carolina, but there are some polls this year, Darren, where I've seen like 8 ACC schools in the national top 25. Beyond our 4 in the state, who are the biggest players in the ACC?
Clemson. I mean, they were the number 2 team in the country before losing the series to NC State. They've just been remarkably consistent. They're certainly in the mix. Florida State, after not making the ACC baseball tournament last year, much less the greater NCAA tournament, is on fire. I mean, they're a top 10 team. I think they're a top 8 national seed contender. They're certainly in contention or in the conversation in terms of teams good enough to get to the College World Series and get to Omaha. Florida State is good, and that's great for the league, right? Florida State has such a rich baseball history. Yeah. It's better when they are good. Virginia would be next, and I mean, if you follow college baseball at all, they're steady as she goes. They hit a ton. They had some issues early with their pitching staff trying to fit some pieces where they best belong, and they're figuring it out, as Brian O'Connor at the head of that coaching staff always seems to do. Other than that, Virginia Tech has one of the best offenses in the entire country. They're closer to that 20 to 25 range, according to most polls this week. But that's a team that can do a lot of damage, score a lot of runs, that travels pretty well and plays pretty well. So they're certainly capable. They're going to be an NCAA regional team. DG, the SEC has had 10 teams make NCAA regionals 5 times. That's the record. The ACC has done it once. I really believe this. In a year where both the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are considerably down, I think that record could be in danger. I don't know that the ACC could break it with an 11th team. I think it's very possible the ACC could get 10 total teams into NCAA regionals. And this is without me glancing at the SEC standings and picking 11 teams. But assumedly, if that room created by the leagues being lesser on this side of the country creates opportunities for the best leagues, assumedly the SEC could even get 10, 11 teams in. And we're talking about, tying the all-time record or potentially breaking it. But the ACC, I think, still has a chance at getting 10 in the overall tournament.
And just to kind of further clarify or paint that bigger picture, there have been top 25s this season where it's, 8 from the SEC, 8 from the ACC, and then that only leaves 9 spots for everybody else combined. So those are the 2 heavyweight leagues in college baseball as we speak. Daron Vaught joining us here on the David Glenn Show. Players to watch. We're going to give you a chance to get into individual teams here in a second. But I think most fans would know, for example, that former NC State star Trey Turner, who happens to be an all-star for happens to be my favorite team, the Philadelphia Phillies, whose jersey I'm wearing today, Chase Utley on the back. Former Duke star Graham Pauley was just with the Blue Devils 2 years ago and last month made his Major League Baseball debut. That's a fast track with the San Diego Padres. Former UNC star Michael Bush, you told me recently, is on an absolute tear with the Chicago Cubs at the Major League Baseball level. Who is playing college baseball here in North Carolina as we speak, who we might see at the Major League Baseball level in the next handful of years?
Yeah, the cool thing is, and we've talked about how great the college baseball is in this state, typically it translates to the next level, and it means we see all kinds of really good baseball players who are ripe for a list like this. I think it begins with, because we're talking on the day that we're talking, Nick Kurtz is Wake Forest's first baseman. And there have been a lot of projections over the past year and a half that have seen Nick Kurtz projected as the number 1 pick in this coming MLB draft. He's taken a little bit of a hit. He got banged up on trying to make a diving defensive play earlier this year and missed a little bit of time. So he had sort of a slow start to his season. DG, he's hit 13 home runs in their last 9 games.
Ooh.
And if you would have said 2 weeks ago, okay, Nick Kurtz is maybe going to challenge the all-time home run record in Wake Forest's program history, I don't know that I would have just endorsed that, right?
Yeah.
Not unless some freakish thing happens and he doesn't get drafted after his junior year, and he stays another year and has an extra season to pad those numbers. But in terms of what he's doing this season, I would have said, nah, he's off to too slow of a start. 13 home runs later, he is 16 behind his former teammate, now of the Milwaukee Brewers organization, Brock Wilken, a first-team All-ACC guy just a season ago. 16. And that's, I mean, it's going to require more of this heater-like performance that he's on, but it's not unreachable like you would have thought just a couple of weeks ago. Kurtz is an incredible athlete. He's this big, long frame, total control of his body in most situations. He's a good defender, a great base runner. I once called a game where he bunted for a single and hit a home run in the same game, consecutive at bats, if I'm not mistaken. So he can do a little bit of everything. Kurtz is atop this list easily. Then you work your way to North Carolina's Vance Honeycutt, who has also at various times been projected to be the number 1 overall pick, probably more like a top 10, definitely a first rounder now. He's an incredible defender, atop the league, the country's leaders in defensive runs saved, which is a metric used to measure exactly how it sounds, number of runs saved by a single defensive performance. In addition to that, he steals a bunch of bases. He hits a bunch of home runs. He's knocking on the door of North Carolina's all-time home run record with just under half the season to go. So Vance Honeycutt is next on that list. Just a couple more. Trey Yesavage, I mentioned both of the pitchers from East Carolina. Their ace is named Trey Yesavage. He was on the collegiate national team for USA Baseball last summer and sort of worked his way into being the ace of that team, which is mighty impressive because that's the best pitchers in the country. He is really good. He's got incredible stuff. It's just like, it's what you expect out of a major league starter. 5 pitches. He uses them all well, mixes them all well, gets a lot of strikeouts. Trey Yesavage is another one to keep an eye on in that conversation. And there are a ton more. I would just call that sort of the podium.
Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com. Well, with the Pirates in mind, our mutual friend, Bethany Bradsher, who I consider, as you know, one of the great sports authors in the state of North Carolina's history, seriously. She has a new book out on East Carolina baseball. It's called Never Take This for Granted, Around the Diamond with College Baseball's Most Devoted Fan Base. And it obviously explores the Pirates' unique college baseball culture, that unique, passionate fan base, including what you've experienced, I know, the jungle at Clark LeClaire Stadium there in Greenville, NC. As someone who has traveled our state extensively, including to a lot of ballparks where you are calling games, what would be on that short list for you of the, quote, best college baseball atmospheres across North Carolina?
Yeah, if I can, I'll quickly endorse Bethany. We both know her personally, so of course as a person, but as a writer as well, I can't reach it. It's right there with the books. Coaching Third, the Keith LeClaire story was another one that she wrote, and I plowed through it about a year ago and loved it. It was great. So I'm sure this one's going to be just as awesome.
She's wonderful.
Clark LeClaire Stadium is a scene. It is incredible. I've called many games there now. Very thankful to be able to do that. In fact, at the beginning of this season, opening night there was the game in which Parker Bird, their player who has a prosthetic leg, made his collegiate debut. And as you can imagine, as any good fan base would do in such a special moment, they showed up, they delivered. And it was, it was surreal being there for that moment. That being said, I've been there for some other incredible moments. The Super Regional a couple of years ago against Texas, where they lost in heartbreaking fashion and came so close to that first trip to Omaha.
Yeah.
But you could taste it, right? And especially if you were there in that very moment, that might be the most energetic that place has ever been. And I wandered out into the jungle. It was my first experience sort of seeing it from their eyes in the jungle. And they've got, the tailgating going on out there just beyond the wall in left center field. It's maybe the best environment for college baseball, not just in the state, but maybe in the country. And I get it. There are some big fan bases who do awesome stuff in other states, but ECU truly has one of the best fan bases, one of the best college baseball environments there is to offer. And there are more in the state. That's not to take anything away from NC State especially when they're really good. They pack out their place. It's loud. It's fun. North Carolina, the Boshemer Stadium might be my favorite place to call a game. It's a great atmosphere. The park is beautiful. They do a great job taking care of it. And typically the Heels are pretty good and pretty competitive. Yep. And I'll say this, the Duke Blue Devils have played a lot of their home games in recent years at Durham Bulls Athletic Park. DBAP is one of my favorite places on earth. So I love that. But for Duke and Duke baseball, and I've known their head coach, Chris Pollard, a long time, I so much admire what he's done with that program. Wait for it. Give it time. They're investing in Jack Coombs Field there on campus. And it's a great setting. If you've ever been there and sat maybe behind home plate, you see there's a big tree line, a big, beautiful tree line beyond the wall. It's on campus right there near where Wallace Wade and Cameron Indoor are. They're going to redo the facilities and make it a bit more of an environment for baseball, since this baseball program has turned into a national power. Give it time, and I think that's going to be a really, really, really cool baseball environment. Again, it just might take a little bit once they get the renovations done, which are scheduled for the conclusion of this season.
When I was doing research a year ago, Darren, for that amazing year where our state, again, had 8 teams all by itself in the NCAA baseball championship, or, that round of 64, if you will, I knew some things conceptually, like North Carolina, for example, has been to 30-plus postseason events as an NCAA baseball program. NC State, 30-plus. Actually, as you mentioned, ECU is not only 30-plus. The Pirates are number one nationally in one of those weird categories where you're half getting credit and half getting criticized. The Pirates have made 33 NCAA baseball championship events. But that's the most without ever getting to the College World Series, as Darren mentioned earlier. But that's obviously another, not just proud in a conceptual sense program, but the numbers speak for themselves. Those 3 programs, UNC, ECU, NC State, have been to 30-plus NCAA baseball championships. I was a little surprised by the sheer number of a place like a Western Carolina or a UNC Wilmington, both of which are in double digits. And the Seahawks case, I think it's either all 11 or close to all 11 have come while the Seahawks' current coach, Randy Hood, a guy you and I have gotten to know fairly well, and we've been there on visits together to that wonderful campus where I've been a professor down there as an adjunct in the communication department. but they treated us like royalty, and I love going back. It's one of the reasons we're doing our big Bacon and Baseball event with the Seahawks specifically as they play the Campbell Camels, their new conference rival there in NCAA play. What can you share about that UNCW story or that Brooksfield atmosphere? Because you always see them all the time in the NCAA tournament now. I mean, I think, again, it's all 11 with Coach Hood, either as an assistant coach for many years and obviously now as the head coach. It just seems to be kind of that mid-major baseball brand, the way we saw like with Davidson while Steph Curry was there in men's basketball, or, you know, when Lavelle Moten had NC Central cooking in men's basketball. There's a lot of examples, but what can you tell us about that part of our state's baseball atmosphere at the college level?
Yeah, well, I'll say this as someone who a long time ago called summer collegiate baseball in Morehead City, North Carolina, over there on the Crystal Coast, not too far away. The Wilmington Sharks were actually a division rival of ours when I was with the Marlins of the Coastal Plain League. Who doesn't love baseball at the beach? I think, you know, that's pretty easy to get behind if the product is assumedly good, as it's been for the Seahawks for so long. I think something else too, and this is a little bit more of a big picture college baseball observation, the continuity of a coaching staff and a culture just goes a long way. And again, you said it, you and I both know Randy. I think the world of the job he's done there, and it shows. And sometimes you have that and the results don't always stick in the way that maybe they should or could. But Randy's gotten that. He's certainly got a really good squad. It's just a cool setting. And that's a school that doesn't have football, right? And the basketball programs have been beneficiaries of that over time. I think that sort of plays into the popularity of baseball there as well. So when you talk about the ECUs with all these tournament appearances, but no College World Series, the UNCWs they're in that next group. If ECU is in the A tier of programs that are always or typically good without a College World Series appearance, UNC Wilmington's right there, and they compete with, you know, programs who have gotten to Omaha, like a Stony Brook in the CAA. Now they're competing with a Campbell in the CAA, which has not been to Omaha, but has been a regular atop the formerly, you know, they were in the Big South Conference and ran away with that league for several years. They play with really, really good teams, and they play. I've seen them a lot over the years too, because they play non-conference games against the Big Four in the ACC, against other teams in the Carolinas who are really good. And when we talk about this state, this area being one of the centers of the college baseball universe, that part matters. I've got, you know, as you and I are talking, I'm preparing for Coastal Carolina at North Carolina, a midweek at the Bosch. That's a top 20 matchup. Yeah. And they play each other every year. It's usually a home and away situation. Not every good Division I college baseball team gets that, because, you know, the non-conference options that are drivable in a midweek scenario aren't always that great. But we've always got, you know, Coastal Carolina's playing Dukes. We've got UNC Wilmington at UNC. We've got Charlotte has turned into a pretty good program under former UNC pitching coach Robert Woodard. They'll play the ACC teams in non-conference action. It's been cool to see, especially over these last several years, with all the programs being as good as they are. The midweeks are highly competitive, and UNC's typically involved in those.
Last thing for you, and I want to remind people who are fans of baseball in North Carolina, as we keep an eye on that more distant topic of whether the Major League Baseball folks will give us a franchise at some point. I know that the ACC baseball tournament, which you have often been a part of calling or broadcasting or attending or all the above, it's in Charlotte this year, often at one of your other favorite places, Durham Bulls Athletic Park in Durham. I know UNCW does get to host the CAA baseball tournament, so we'll be there in early May. conference tournament for the Seahawks. Again, they host. That's later May. And then at the very end of May, we ramp up the NCAA baseball championship. But the last thing I wanted to get out of you is what else should folks know about the ACC Baseball, et cetera, podcast you have in conjunction with D1 Baseball? I'm familiar with Danny Graves as a former pitcher. He much better than I. He a righty, I'm a lefty.
University of Miami Hall of Famer, Cincinnati Reds Hall of Famer. So
incredible. I know you guys have a lot of fun. I know your passion for the sport, but what else should folks know who might want to hunt it down and become one of your regular listeners and viewers?
Yeah. First off, we would appreciate that if you would. We post all of our episodes, audio format, wherever you get podcasts, but we also stream on the D1 Baseball YouTube page, which I believe is youtube.com/D1 Baseball Digital. We're part of the D1 Baseball Podcast Network, which includes the D1 Baseball Podcast proper, as well as Highway to Hoover is the name of the SEC extra. It's a SEC specific podcast, but no, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We would love to have you aboard on this journey as we follow the ACC baseball season on social media at ACCBSBETC in most places, not on TikTok. That's a little cumbersome for me at this point. Maybe we'll get there one day. But no, we're hoping to do a lot of fun stuff. I know we're going to have Georgia Tech's phenomenal freshman Drew Burris on with us a little bit later this week. Danny and I like to goof around. We have a segment called Hall of Name in which I just name a former teammate or a former opponent of his and let him go. I wind him up and let him go. First story that comes to mind, first awkward encounter, what have you. And those have been a lot of fun, from, street racing with King Griffey Jr. to having a missed call from Pedro Martinez he didn't even realize was a call from Pedro Martinez. All kinds of fun stories come out when we play Hall of Names. So we use the et cetera in the title to reserve the right to meander from the ACC a little bit, and keeping it up year round. I mean, we're a baseball podcast, so we'll keep him around on a weekly basis, and the two of us will talk Major League Baseball some over the summer once the college season is over too. So we have a lot of fun. I think it's fun to listen to, but I'll let your listeners be the judge.
His name is Daron Vaught. Many of you know him as the longtime host of the David Glenn Show. We are thrilled to have him back. By the way, you've heard him and seen him as the voice of High Point men's basketball. This past season, the voice of ECU men's basketball, the longtime voice of USA Baseball right here in our backyard. Again, that national complex in Cary, North Carolina. So he gets to see these guys when they're prospects, when they're in college. And of course, he's a Major League Baseball fan as well. Catch his podcast, ACC Baseball, etc. Find it everywhere. Great to see you, my friend. I will see you face-to-face in person again soon. But thank you for this, maiden voyage on this newer version of the David Glenn Show and our new North Carolina Sports Network. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thank you a lot. This was fun. We don't often get to do this in like a more formal interview setting. That was good.
Usually it's just me calling you in the middle of the day or vice versa. Now we get to share our conversations with the rest of the world. Great to see you. I'll see you again soon. And we will have more on our upcoming trip to UNCW for our big bacon and baseball event. Thanks for being with us on all things baseball, college and pro today on the North Carolina Sports Network.